Mr. President, this is one skinny public safety bill. This bill will, in fact, put more lives at risk. It's a pretend budget, and it's a cut budget in real terms for services and for the employees. Let me explain to you the ways in which I think this budget is morally deficient and fiscally farcical. It's only a $25 million increase over a $2.3 billion base. And there are no salary increases in here for our public servants. There are health insurance cost increases, but those aren't covered in the tails. There's a zero tails for them. That's just a fiscal nonsense. We all know that there are going to be tails for the health insurance increases in here, but our budget shows zero. This budget will result in net cuts to the number of correctional officers in our prisons. Now, let me say that again, because on the face of it, there's money that is supposedly intended to increase the number of correctional officers so that we don't have more correctional officers die in our prisons. But in effect, with this bill, there will be a net cut of correctional officers in our prisons. The governor's budget has funding for 120 net new guards, plus 47 support staff, for a total of 167 staff, and with technology improvements, $36.5 million budget cost. The Senate projects 38 new guards, total staff of 66 for $9.5 million in the budget. Now, first of all, our correctional agency, and the Commissioner of Corrections, says they need 120 guards. Actually, they need more, but they project that they can fill 120 positions in this biennium. And despite the arguments that some have tried to make that they don't have the ability to recruit and train sufficient staff to fill those needs, they have actually, at the Department of Corrections, made some changes in their recruitment and training processes so that they are on pace now to keep up with that projected 120 and believe they can fill those positions. Now, what this budget does not cover, and here's why this is a net loss in correctional officers, because this budget does not cover the mandatory cost of providing health care for our offenders. The courts have made clear that the prisons have no option here of not providing adequate health care for the offenders who are in their care because they are living in the prisons under the control and direction of the state of Minnesota. The prisoners have no options to go somewhere else for their health care. They have to be provided their health care by our corrections system. Yet, this budget does not provide the funds to provide that care. We know there are going to be increased costs in health care, which means the department is going to have to take that money out of other parts of the budget. That means people. As the chairman already indicated, most of this budget is about people. That's where the money is going to have to come from to cover offender health care. That means cuts in staffing. There are also anticipated and negotiated salary increases, which are going to take effect July 1st. They aren't funded in this budget either. They aren't funded in this budget, but they're going to have to be paid for. Where's that money going to come from? Cuts in other parts of the budget, which is to say cuts in personnel, which means fewer correctional officers, not more. The Department of Corrections projects the net loss of correctional officers of 78 full-time equivalents in fiscal year 20 and 119 fiscal year equivalents addition in fiscal year 21. And in the tail years, out in 23-24, a net loss of 195 correctional officers. Now, if we don't have enough correctional officers right now in the facilities to make sure that the officers go to work in the morning and leave at the end of the day to go home to their families because they're running staff too thin, because they only have one officer to watch over the prisoners when they're in their facilities, when they're transferring from one program to another. When they don't have enough officers there now, and they say they need 120 more, and this budget is going to cut almost 200 officers from the budget, from the correctional staff, it's going in the opposite direction of officer safety. When you look out to 23-24 with 195 additional losses, that's the equivalent of the entire operating cost for the state correctional facility in Red Wing. It's also the equivalent of all of the chemical dependency and sex offender treatment provided in the state correctional system. All of it. As some of the correctional officers testified at the Judiciary Committee hearing, they need bodies in the correctional system so they can go home safely. This bill increases their risk of not going home safely or not going home at all. In addition, there is no money for improved prison security. The governor funds $7.7 million for that. There is no money for the disaster contingency account. Just none. It's funded with another contingency. If in the contingency that there's money left over when projections come in down the road in the fall sometime, if we have more money coming in than we end up budgeting for this session, only then will there be a backfill to the disaster contingency account. If there are disasters between now and then, or if there's not enough to backfill the disaster contingency account, then the communities of every member of this Senate are going to be lagging in getting reimbursed for the costs of their emergencies. All of our communities that experience an emergency, whether it's summer tornadoes or additional flooding or whatever it happens to be, are going to suffer because this budget does not put any money actually into the disaster contingency account until at least next fall, and maybe not even enough then. The courts. The courts specifically asked for enough money so they can maintain the specialty courts dealing with treatment, chemical dependency treatment. This budget doesn't provide it. We've had a lot of conversations in this body about the opioid crisis in Minnesota. Those addicts are showing up in our court system, and the best equipped courts to deal with that are the specialty treatment courts. Yet this budget does not provide the funding to be able to maintain and increase the amount of treatment courts that are available, which means there are going to be fewer addicts, opioid addicts, that are going to get successful treatment, and we're putting more of them at risk as a result of that. Our state is constitutionally mandated to provide guardians ad litem for children who are in the court system. Children, not the adults, not their parents. Children who are in the court system. Yet right now, many of those children are going through the court system alone, without anyone there to watch out for their best interests. This is constitutionally mandated, yet this budget does not provide the funding for adequate staff to meet that mandate. Kids will continue to go through the court system, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds going through the court system alone. There is no funding in this budget to treat domestic violence perpetrators. No treatment, no prevention means more victims of domestic assault in our communities. There's no money in this budget for telephone CPR training for the 911 operators. And we heard in committee an actual recording of a 911 operator that was giving CPR advice to a caller who was dealing with an emergency situation for a person who had fallen ill. But not all 911 operators have that skill. They requested funding to learn that training so that they could provide that assistance and save lives over the phone when every second counts for someone who's having a heart attack or a stroke. No money in this bill for that. Our public defender system is substantially shortchanged here. This, again, constitutionally mandated services for criminal defendants. The whole criminal justice system suffers when there are insufficient public defenders in the system because everyone's waiting around for the PDs to show up to handle the cases. Their caseloads are among the worst in the nation. They came in with a very reasonable request. The governor funded it. No additional money in this budget to provide additional public defenders. The Department of Public Safety outlined several areas where they need specific help as well. For example, the currently existing School Safety Center, which provides consultation and advice to our school districts all around the state on how to protect their facilities, the students in our K-12 system, from outside attack. They provide a lot of services, but the demand has increased quite substantially just in the last couple of years. All they're asking for is 2 additional FTEs to consult with schools, but there's no funding here for them. The Department of Public Safety has an aging and obsolete and slow and unstable automated fingerprint system. It's in such bad shape that it's out of compliance with the Federal Bureau of Investigation's requirements. The system is obsolete. There are delays in running fingerprints from crime scenes. There are matches that aren't being made because the system isn't capable of having all the information to make those matches. There are delays in identifying and capturing suspects, or on the flip side, they're holding innocent people in custody when they think they have a suspect and are waiting to get fingerprint results to find out if the person they have is the right person. Or worse, they're can charge and convict the wrong people because they don't have good or prompt fingerprint data. As the Department of Public Safety has told us, this compromises their crime-solving capabilities and leaves predators at large. And members, you have on your desk a letter from the Commissioner of Public Safety, as you have a letter from the Commissioner of Corrections that also details some of this information. The Department of Public Safety is requiring additional funds for improved cyber security. This is where it's at, members. This is the bottom line. Cybersecurity will affect all of us. They need some attention and some funding, and there's no money in this budget to help them with those additional requirements. They sought additional money to do better investigations regarding vulnerable adult and sexual assault cases. No money, no additional money in this budget for that either. And they've informed me that because Senator Rosen's bill is only half funded with the dealing with the opioid crisis, the Department of Public Safety doesn't have sufficient funds to make up the difference. There's no funding here for that either. The Peace Officer Training Fund is suffering a $6 million cut in this bill. That means less training for our officers. The Department of Human Rights, which helps businesses understand how to comply with our anti-discrimination laws in Minnesota and helps people who believe they've been discriminated against get an investigation and find out if they have been discriminated against. They've asked for 4 new regional offices around the state so they can bring their services closer to the people that they're helping. No additional funding for the Human Rights Department here. That means more workers suffering discrimination without recourse and more businesses making errors in the way they're handling situations, exposing them to unnecessary liability. There's no money at all in this bill for the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women's Task Force. There's no money at all in this bill for the Department of Corrections ombudsperson to help reduce violence in our prisons. There's no money in this bill at all for expanded juvenile detention alternatives to reduce crime and lower prison costs. There is no increase for civil legal services. They turn away 2 out of 3 people who are actually financially qualified for their services. Yet they are left to fend for themselves in the legal system. These are people facing landlord-tenant issues, custody battles, other family law issues, immigration issues. They all qualify for civil legal services, but the agencies cannot support them. And in our judiciary system, an independent branch of government, not only do we not help them with their treatment court funding issues, we don't help them hardly at all with any funding because, like the other agencies, they are heavily dependent on the people. This bill, frankly, is a slap in the face to the state Supreme Court, to the judges, to the district courts that they supervise and manage, and that most of our constituents have direct, if they have any involvement in the court system, civil or criminal, that's where they see it. And we are somehow expecting our judicial employees, like all of the other employees in this budget, to work without any pay increase. Now, how can this be so if, as the GOP often states, there's a $1 billion surplus in our state coffers? Of course, I pointed out earlier that now I'm a bit confused whether the state's broke or whether there's a surplus that needs to be somehow not put back into maintaining our services in the state, but doing other things. I mean, the fact is, the $1 billion revenue over cost number that we're dealing with that's in budget, if you account for inflation, that's what simply maintain our current level of services. But inflation includes inflation in the costs of our people that deliver these services to Minnesotans. So I wonder if Senator Limmer will yield for a question or two.
Senator Limmer will yield. Senator Latz.
Senator Limmer, do you feel that there is sufficient funding in this bill for correctional officer hiring?
Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Latz, in light of the target that we have and recognizing a total of 104 correctional officers at this time and recognizing the 80 positions, 40 of which are filled already, at least by last count, by my discussion with the commissioner, would total about 184. I believe we're well on our way to cover that. In light of 80 officers or 80 vacancies for over a year that haven't been filled, I'm somewhat concerned that the Corrections Department would be able to fill the 80 this past year, as well as the new 104 positions that we have already scheduled in this bill. I believe that the timeline would convince me that I would hope that the department would fill these positions in a short period of time.
Senator Latz.
So, Mr. President, I mean, the big caveat here was in light of the target. And the commissioner answered these questions at Judiciary Committee hearings, that they firmly believe they've got the resources and the ability to fill all of the positions, 120 positions that they're asking for. That's not funded in this bill. We have some amendments, Mr. Chairman, to try to remedy some of the deficiencies in this bill. Mr. Chairman, I would like to offer the A34 amendment.
Senator Latz offers the A34 amendment. The Secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Latz moves to amend Senate File Number 802 as follows, page 13 after line 15, insert. This is the A34 amendment.
To the amendment, Senator Latz.
Mr. President, the A34 amendment would transfer $5 million out of the surplus existing in the Minnesota Correctional Industries Revolving Fund into the state's general fund as a one-time transfer. We have been provided with fiscal projections by the department. This is a fund which is a standalone fund. It's filled by the revenues from the correctional industries, MinCor, as we call it. And right now, they have funds in there that are not projected for use in the upcoming immediate period of time, and we'd like to put it to good use. So this amendment would give us an opportunity to provide some funding for some of the areas where we are deficient in this bill.
To the amendment, Senator Torres Ray.